What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of UFC action. We have UFC San Antonio this Saturday on deck, featuring a potential 5-round main event at bantamweight between Marlon Chito Vera and Corey Sandhagen. Awesome, exciting main event there. See who's next in line for the belt at the weight class, potentially. 13 fights on this card, all said and done. We've got a mixed bag of talent between some pretty good fighters, some not so good fighters maybe clinging to their job in the UFC, and some debuting fighters, you know, people off the Dana White Contender Series, things like that. So a kind of a tough betting card as far as the money lines are concerned. Some of the lines have changed back and forth as the week has gone on and still are moving. So I do have 3 money line bets already. I'll talk about, I think, 2 or 3, but I'll mention those as I go through the fights. Looking to add some more, waiting for the lines to move on some of them. This Thursday, I'll be having an awesome, knowledgeable guest, Tim Troiano from the Lambo Plays podcast. I had his co-host, Narco Cop, a few weeks ago, and we had a good time, so I'm bringing on Tim Troiano. He's gracing us with his presence and his knowledge to break down and find some betting spots on this tough card. And I hope that makes up for this video coming out a little bit late this week. I did have a pretty busy weekend. Not only did I make weight on Saturday for a competition on Sunday, I spent 8 hours on the live stream with Johnny K Picks and Blood Money Bets over there, and Manny from MMA Fight Club as well. Had a profitable pay-per-view card as well, so that was nice to not lose on that one. And then I had to compete on Sunday. And after a powerlifting meet, you guys, you just feel like you got hit by a truck. You're brain dead, you're sore and crippled. So it took me a bit to get back into gear on Sunday and Monday. I could have just spouted my opinion based on what I saw, on the bout sheet and what research I had done, but I wanted to make sure I really dove into this card and got my finalized opinion. So now I've got that done a little bit later than usual, but hey, we've got an awesome guest on Thursday for that live stream, so join us there at 9 p.m. Central Time. And hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's break into the first prelim of UFC San Antonio. First fight of the night, we have a women's bantamweight bout between Tamires Vidal and Hailey Cowan. The Brazilian Tamires Vidal has a 7-1 professional record and has already made her debut in the UFC, a successful one against Ramona Pascal at the end of last year. Now, normally a win over Ramona Pascal would not mean very much at all to me, but the way that she did it was by round 1 TKO. She got like a one-step jumping knee right to Ramona Pascal's abdomen, crippled her, and ended the fight with that one strike. I think that strike would have probably ended anybody if it was landed correctly. So Vidal does have more of like a brawling boxing type of style, a little bit more of a blitz attack, one combination at a time rather than, consistent output over a fight. Her cardio is yet to be really tested that much. Her one loss in her record is to current UFC fighter Carol Hossa by submission a couple years back. And she does have one of her 7 wins as by disqualification. But really, she was getting beat by current UFC fighter Eileen Perez. So that can be kept in mind a little bit. She is 3-0 in decisions so far. And we have seen her get a couple of submissions, one of them by heel hook. So her know-how on the ground is not to be questioned that much so far. But I think really where she struggles is going to be at striking distance against Hailey Cowan, who's going to be a longer fighter, more athletic, faster. The former D1 gymnast in Hailey Cowan is more of like a textbook MMA fighter, since at 31 years old, she's recently transitioned from one other sport to mixed martial arts. She doesn't have a whole lot of bad habits, except for she can struggle on the ground a little bit. She has been submitted in both of her losses for Hailey Cowan. So scheduled to fight Eileen Perez a couple of weeks ago, Cowan had to pull out of her debut because she had an ovarian cyst rupture the day of the weigh-ins. Now that sounds horrible, but I think that should heal up after a couple days to a couple of weeks. The bleeding should subside and she should be good to go. So now we've got her taking on Tamires Vidal. I think I like this matchup better for Cowan than her original one. I just really do think that the in-and-out movement and striking speed of Hailey Cowan should be enough to score points over 3 rounds and win her a decision here. So as long as she can end up on her feet most of the time, dominant positions in the clinch a lot of the time, and not end up underneath the crushing weight of Tamires Vidal, who's very heavy on top position on the ground. Good ground and pound from Vidal and that submission game that she's shown us in the past. So that would be the worst case scenario for Cowan, is to be directly underneath Vidal. But I think at range, if this stays in the feet for the majority of at least 2 out of 3 rounds, I think Cowan wins this by decision. So currently, Vidal is the plus 100 even money underdog. Haley Cowan the slight favorite at minus 120. Not a bad price tag, but I feel like we missed the boat a little bit since Cowan did open up and stayed as an underdog for a little bit before the line flipped. So by decision, Haley Cowan is about a plus 155 price tag. I don't hate that if you need to play this fight, but overall I think Cowan should have the better cardio and athleticism to win the fight by points. Up next at flyweight, we've got Vinicius Salvador taking on Victor Altamirano. This is Brazil's Salvador making his debut here as the loose, unorthodox, very flashy but powerful striker, scoring 13 knockouts out of his 14 wins, including a successful round 2 knockout on the Contender Series last season over Shannon Ross. Ross, of course, we just saw make his debut and get knocked out, I think on short notice against Clayton Rodriguez, so could be par for the course for Shannon Ross, but Salvador does have some serious power in his strikes. Keeps the hands down, very relaxed, uses footwork, elusive head and body movement to invite people in to strike against him, and then he'll pull counter and knock you out. And once he gets you wobbled with one strike, you got to imagine there's about 10 to 20 more coming. He'll get in his flow state and be very accurate, trapping you against the fence and just teeing off on you to finish the fight, giving you no room to breathe or recover. And this has worked many times in his career so far. He is 14-4, but the times it's failed him are when people can put him on his back foot, really avoid and be defensively sound to avoid those big power strikes. And that gets Salvador a little bit desperate, and he starts getting more go big or go home with his strikes, less technical, a little bit more telegraphing with his strikes. Or if you can take him off of his feet, get him onto the mat. He has been submitted before, and I've seen him ground and pounded as well. So Victor Altamirano could employ that strategy. Altamirano is going to be the hometown fighter here out of his home state of Texas. The Mexican boxer, the former LFA champion, Altamirano is 1-1 in the UFC at this point. I thought he should have won his debut against Carlos Hernandez, gotten that split decision going his way, but he lost that bout, had to come back against Daniel da Silva and scored a round 1 knockout over him. Again, via ground and pound, he was able to knock down Daniel da Silva after some early adversity and tee off some massive elbows and punches for the round 1 stoppage. That could happen against Salvador. So Altamirano, he's only lost twice. I mentioned the split decision in his debut that didn't go his way. And a few years back, he lost to Jared Brooks, who's the current, at this point in time, he's the current 1 championship flyweight champion. So not a bad resume to have, honestly, in his losses. 11-2 overall, 2 knockouts, 4 submissions. He is 5-1 in decisions. He's going to be the higher output striker, the more technical boxer here. And as long as he can avoid getting finished early in this bout, I think he should cruise to a decision victory, if not a late finish here. So I'm not normally the type of bettor to bank on a one-hit knockout artist at flyweight. I'd rather have the guy who's got the better technical skill, more well-rounded game. Altamirano's got good boxing, but his grappling is decent as well. And he's never been knocked out before. He's very durable. So I'd rather take a well-rounded, arsenal of traits like that versus, more of a wild guy who fights like he's in a higher weight class. So that's just my view of this. Now with the money line being Altamirano's a slight underdog here at plus 100, money still coming in on the slight favorite Salvador minus 120. I would imagine that money line will swell up as the week goes on in the favor of Salvador. So I might get to a bet on Altamirano if I get more plus money, maybe a plus 115, plus 120. That would be nice. But chopping this down by a prop, I'm not really sure if this goes over 1.5 or under. I'm not sure if it's going to, end by finish for Altamirano or by decision. So I would just lead on his money line as the more well-rounded fighter here who's been in the UFC a couple of times and looked pretty good so far. So give me Altamirano to get, I'll call it a decision win. Moving up to lightweight for the next bout between Manuel Torres and Trey Ogden. This is a little bit like the last bout that we talked about at flyweight between Vinicius Salvador and Altamirano, in the way that Torres is going to be making a second walk to the cage, the younger man here at 27 years old. Trey Ogden is going to be a little bit older at 33. Torres, the aggressive striker, puts on a fast pace early, a lot of round-1 knockouts, and Trey Ogden, the grappler here. But as we've seen, Trey Ogden does have some serviceable striking, pretty defensively sound. He gets in and out of range pretty quickly, but ultimately he'd be best to get this fight to the mat because Trey Ogden, 16-5 record, and out of his 16 wins, 11 of those are submissions. He has gone 4-2 in decision results as well. never been knocked out before. So another spot where you've got an aggressive striker who scored 6 knockouts and 6 submissions against a guy in Trey Ogden who can hold his own in the grappling, but also has never been knocked out before. And Trey Ogden, last September, he actually cashed as a plus 320 underdog against the debuting and pretty exciting debut fighter Daniel Zellhuber, who outsized him, outreached him by a ton as a pretty long-rangey kickboxer. But Daniel Zellhuber fell apart, man. He had UFC jitters or, octagon debut jitters, something. He was very low output, very timid, and Trey Ogden just walked him down, outstruck him, and eventually got the fight to the mat on a couple of occasions, I believe. So Trey Ogden did not cash as a dog for me that night. I was pretty confident in Zellhuber, but that was one of those lessons to be learned that you can't trust those debuting fighters all that much at a high price tag. So Trey Ogden, I'd rather he wrestled a little bit more. Like last time, he was pretty content to strike with Zellhuber because there wasn't a lot of danger coming back his way. I hope that didn't instill some false confidence in him that he's a striker now, because he should stick to his strengths. 11 subs are not done by accident. He's got a very good double leg takedown and good top pressure and know-how on the ground. Now, Manuel Torres, his best shot, of course, is early in the fight and on the feet. Not the most technical striker, but he is powerful and can be pretty accurate. But yeah, it's scaring me off of him because he did have that round 1 knockout over Frank Camacho, who's, he wasn't the best UFC fighter. And he did have that fight on the Contender Series against Colton England, who I think got eye poked in round 1, complained about it. The ref didn't stop it, and then he got knocked out. So other than that, Manuel Torres, not the most well-rounded resume as far as like advanced competition goes, but he has been subbed in both of his losses, so that's something to consider. So this makes this a pretty binary fight. Manuel Torres probably needs to get this done early rather than later and on the feet at striking range, whereas Trey Ogden should probably try to wrestle as quickly as possible, take Torres out of his element early, catch him over swinging and get the takedown. Ogden does have a good double leg takedown and the clear grappling advantage here, whereas Torres has lost both of his professional bouts by submission. They weren't that long ago, and Torres gets less and less dangerous as the fight goes. I think he's not been out of round 1, win or loss, in his last 8 fights straight. So it's going back to like 2019 or 2018 since he's even been to a second round. So I got to take Trey Ogden here. I'm actually going to gamble on his money line here. 1 unit at plus 135 is where I got him at. I think he's still right around that same price tag right now. About a minus 150 price tag as a favorite for Manuel Torres. But I'm also taking a half of a unit on Trey Ogden's submission prop, which opened up on BetOnline at like plus 550. I think it's since come down a bit, but I'm sure some other sportsbooks will have it right around that plus 500 line when they drop, like FanDuel, DraftKings, things like that. So a half of a unit to, for Trey Ogden to do what he does 11 out of 16 times. The 100% weakness in all of his finishes for Manuel Torres. Give me that prop all day. Half a unit at plus 550 for Trey Ogden's submission. And then, of course, I did take the 1 unit on his money line at plus 135. I'm just going to take the guy who's at least been 1-1 in the UFC so far. Just cash as a big underdog. Seems to be, improving in his momentum and his confidence as a striker here. And Manuel Torres, you can't trust this guy to come in here. He took out Frank Camacho, who wasn't the best UFC fighter. And just as a theme, this guy is not making it out of round 1. So I think he'll fall apart. Give me Trey Ogden by round 2 submission. Up next at flyweight, we've got CJ Vergara taking on the returning Daniel da Silva. And at this point, we know the deal with Daniel da Silva. This guy is a kill-or-be-killed fighter. Never seen the scorecards. Da Silva is 5'6", only 26 years old, with that shoot-to-box background, that Muay Thai style, with very good jiu-jitsu as well. I mean, the guy can get a slick back take. He can jump on your back from a standing position. 11-4 as a pro with 5 knockouts, 6 submissions. But his losses, of course, are 1 submission due to that knee bar from Francisco Figueiredo in round 1. He's also been knocked out 3 times, 2 of them in the UFC by Jeff Molina and Victor Altamirano most recently. So even at flyweight, all of his finishes coming by stoppage under 1.5 rounds. In fact, Daniel da Silva, the Brazilian, has never seen a round 3 out of his 15 fights as a pro, and he's only seen a round 2 a couple of times. So just not the type of guy I tend to back, especially at this level. Minus 240 is the price tag on CJ Vergara, who is 2-2 in the UFC. And he's coming off of the loss by submission in round 2 to Tatsuro Taira. Can't really hold that one against him too much, especially after coming off of an impressive split decision victory, controversial one over Clayton Rodriguez. And I think Clayton Rodriguez is like more of a complete version of what Daniel da Silva could be if he had a gas tank to back up his skill set. CJ Vergara, good forward pressure. I think underrated takedown defense and grappling as a whole, good boxing, and the guy's durable. He's never been knocked out before, so he was able to play the Matador against Clayton Rodriguez a couple fights back. At 31 years old, seems to be in his prime at this weight class. I think he does get this job done inside the distance, probably an early round 2 inside the distance stoppage. I would assume another knockout. He does have 6 knockouts and no submissions for CJ Vergara, so the money line is wide because Daniel da Silva is dangerous within those first few minutes. He could end up getting, a stoppage victory of some sort, give CJ Vergara his first knockout loss, potentially with like a flying knee, a spinning wheel kick. Anything of that nature is possible with Daniel da Silva early, but he blows his load very quickly in a fight, whether chasing submissions or knockouts. So I got to take CJ Vergara, who's got the durability, cardio, experience, boxing, wrestling edge here, so pretty confident in this pick. The fight does not go to decision or the under. Maybe the fight doesn't start round 3 would be the better way to play this, since I think the under 1.5 in a flyweight fight is going to be pretty highly priced. Let's see what it is now. We're looking at Daniel da Silva, CJ Vergara. The under 1.5 in this fight at flyweight is minus 200. Even though that's probably going to hit, I just can't see myself paying that at flyweight. So CJ Vergara inside the distance, round 2 is the pick. Welterweight bout up next between Trevin Giles and Preston Parsons. A pretty interesting matchup, especially considering the money line is about a pick-em price tag. You know, there's a slight favorite on Trevin Giles at minus 115, slight underdog in Preston Parsons at minus 105. But money's going back and forth. At this point, it might be going towards the more UFC veteran fighter in Trevin Giles, who is making his 11th walk to the cage now. He's 6-4 in the UFC. Due to a couple of sketchy decisions, he could easily be 5-5 or 4-6 even. But this will be Trevin Giles' 3rd walk as a welterweight. He did come down from middleweight where he had mixed success in the UFC so far. Only 30 years old at this point for the 6-foot-tall Trevin Giles. Preston Parsons making his 3rd walk to the cage overall. 27-year-old grappler for Parsons. Trevin Giles, a powerful low-output striker with the BJJ brown belt, so he's not lost on the ground either. But 9 submissions out of his 10 wins for Parsons, who took a short notice debut against Daniel Rodriguez, got knocked out, and most recently he had a short notice opponent in his own right, which was Evan Elder. So Preston Parsons able to out-wrestle Elder, get him to the mat, and secure about, I think, like 8 minutes of control time over 3 rounds. Still could not get the submission, even after having like 4 or 5 or 6 arm triangle attempts on Evan Elder. Couldn't get the job done there. So this is an interesting matchup. You could look at this a few different ways. Trevin Giles, a lot more experience, probably the much better striker on the feet. Low output, as we saw in his last fight against Louis Koski. When Koski was low output, Trevin Giles had nobody to really counter strike against, so they kind of just had a staring match. Trevin Giles slightly out-edged him with activity. Nothing too impressive there. Before that, powerful strikers he's losing against. Michael Morales, Dricus du Plessis, they both knocked out Trevin Giles. He's struggled against grapplers in the past, but he's had success against a couple of others, like Roman Dolidze, James Krause, both those guys good grapplers. Giles able to edge out very close, controversial, arguable decisions against both of them. But against really good grapplers like Gerald Mearshart, Zach Cummings, those guys tapped him out at middleweight. So there's some room to be had here. At worst, you can tap out Trevin Giles if you can take him down, get him to the mat. A consolation prize to getting him down, you can at least stalemate him the way that James Krause and Dolidze did. At least take him off of his element on the feet. Preston Parsons, I'm not quite sure where he stands here. He's giving up a lot of experience. He's not going to be, probably not going to be quite as big as Giles. It might be close. But what I worry about is if Preston Parsons can use his wrestling to get this fight to the mat, what if Trevin Giles, like Preston Parsons has good wrestling, good level changes, but not the best top control. Trevin Giles could prove to find himself scrambled into a top position and then start winning minutes there when he was the one getting taken down. So I worry about that. The cardio of Preston Parsons against that of Giles. I've seen Trevin Giles outpace some people before, get it back to the feet, outstrike them, end up in a dominant position in the mat, and then threaten submissions himself the way he did against James Krause in that short notice bout. So, it's an even money line for a reason here. Don't really know how Trevin Giles is going to fare in another welterweight bout. He hasn't looked great there so far. But I'm going to trust Trevin Giles to get the job done here. Not with my money. I won't be betting this fight, but I just think he's got good enough submission defense, a good enough striking edge on the feet, of course, to end the fight there. Or he could end up in dominant positions on the mat. Couple that with some striking, minutes won on the feet. He could, squeak out another Trevin Giles split decision type of win. So give me Giles to win by a close decision here. I just think he's going to be able to do enough in all areas of the game. Use some experience and some good BJJ defense to win this fight. Featherweight bout up next between Lucas Alexander and Steven Peterson, two guys that we have not seen a lot of recently. It's been a while. Steven Peterson last fought, I think, about a year ago. He had a very close decision loss to Julian Erosa, probably a sizable underdog in that matchup, and Julian Erosa almost dropped the ball, especially in round 2. He got crowded, either dropped or at least hurt badly by the strikes of Peterson. But ultimately, Julian Erosa was able to fire back and I think drop Peterson in rounds 2 and rounds 3 to secure that split decision victory. Now, Steven Peterson, generalist. He's got a Muay Thai background, BJJ background, but really just his best trait is being durable enough to absorb strikes and move forward. He's got decent cardio, and he's got okay wrestling as well. He's pretty much like a lower tier featherweight gatekeeper, in my opinion. Like, he's able to keep out guys. For example, all of his wins are against guys that are not in the UFC anymore. He got that spinning back fist knockout, his only finish in the UFC, I believe, over Martin Bravo, who's been cut, Matt Bassett, who's been cut, and also Chase Hooper, who, was probably like 21 years old at the time, and we've seen his, I'm not quite sure where his ceiling is. He is win-loss, win-loss. Steven Peterson did beat him by decision. So he's 3-4 in the UFC currently. Steven Peterson, he's 19-10 as a whole. I mean, it kind of describes, how hit or miss this guy is. I just think he's able to beat guys that are very one-dimensional. His wrestling is good enough to best guys that are either, jiu-jitsu players and like to play off their back too much, or strikers that just don't have that takedown defense of their game, shored up. But Lucas Alexander, 27 years old, we only saw one bout in the UFC so far in his debut against Joanderson Brito. He did get his back taken from a standing position within a couple of minutes. He was choked out by Brito. So not a good look, but not a bad loss, all things considered. On the regional scene, though, Lucas Alexander, a very tall Brazilian for the weight class, like 5'11" at 145. Long linear strikes, so his boxing is crisp, 1-2s down the pipe, usually find their mark. His kicks for all targets are effective, the leg kicks especially early. He invests in body strikes from both stances, so he can kind of adapt and throw people off with that stance switching. And former UFC fighter Jacob Kilborn, before coming to the UFC, Lucas Alexander outstruck him soundly over 2 rounds and then actually broke his arm with one of those body kicks that were blocked, ending that fight by TKO stoppage. So a guy who not only has power to strike for 15 minutes, but he's got the cardio to last. He is 4-0 in decisions, only losing his 3 professional bouts all by submission, and all of them were in round 1 as well. So yeah, I got to go with Lucas Alexander here. I'm not sure why the money line is the way it is. I think it might be a recency bias of Peterson looking good against a known name, which is Julian Erosa. Maybe he's been in the UFC. They're giving him some respect on the line. But for Steven Peterson to be a minus 145 favorite over Lucas Alexander, who's right now a plus 125 to plus 135 underdog, I just don't see it. I think Peterson's hittable. I think Lucas Alexander also possesses the trait of being able to strike accurately and powerfully moving backwards. So if Peterson wants to play the durable pressure fighter, I think he'll get pieced up by the slick Muay Thai of Alexander over 3 rounds. Peterson has only been knocked out 1 time. I'm not sure if Alexander is the guy to do it. He quite possibly could be, but let me get Alexander by decision, and I do have a money line bet on him, 1 unit at plus 130. Another featherweight bout up next between Daniel Pineda and Tucker Lutz, 2 guys we haven't seen in the UFC in quite some time. We saw Daniel Pineda, I want to say it was maybe early last year, I think it was. He got no contested by Andre Fili. who admittedly was kicking Pineda's ass at range, striking-wise, but suffered an eye poke, and Pineda had to quit the bout mid-contest for a no contest because the eye, I think, was like the reflexes just weren't letting it open or something like that. I don't think it was a cop-out for Pineda in that fight. But he's taking on Tucker Lutz, who last fought November of 2021, so a little over a year ago, and that was to a decision against Pat Sabatini. I think Tucker Lutz had some sort of knee injury, perhaps, that kept him out. So still a 12-2 record, and Pat Sabatini could not finish Tucker Lutz inside the distance despite taking him to the mat repeatedly. Tucker Lutz only one knockout loss, and that was in his debut as a pro. And now he's only lost again to Pat Sabatini by decision. So that snapped a 12-fight winning streak for Tucker Lutz, who's a very good wrestle boxer. I think he was like a lifelong wrestler through high school and maybe some college, transitioned to mixed martial arts, and his boxing and Muay Thai looks very good. So combination striking, pretty high output. His cardio can keep up. I don't think it's elite for Tucker Lutz, but it can keep up in a fight, especially compared to that cardio of Daniel Pineda, who's going to be 9 years older at 37. This is Pineda's second stint in the UFC. He went 3-4 back in like 2012 to 2014, I think. I saw him fight a couple of times back in the day. And then he went to various organizations, Bellator, the PFL. He successfully was doing good work. I think he got a round 1 TKO and a round 1 guillotine in the PFL, but he got flagged for his testosterone to epitestosterone ratio being too high, which means that they take it upon themselves, the commission, if they can't catch what you're on, like the substance, whatever type of testosterone you're taking, they can flag the ratio of your natural testosterone with the activated form of epitestosterone being off. So they do that quite a bit. So his flagged, but they didn't actually catch him with a substance. So he got no contested for that. So now he's got 3 no contests on his record. But a really good grappler, 18 submissions, 9 knockouts, but he's 0-5 in decisions for Daniel Pineda. Wild striking when he does strike. It's like big looping hooks, overhands, trying to close the distance. And he does have a BJJ black belt, and he'll accept bottom position and get himself taken down because he can threaten with the guillotine I mentioned. He can threaten with arm bars, triangle chokes, and just various things to get to a dominant position or secure the tap. But look, his gas tank is not very good. He's never really making it to a decision, win or lose. I think only 5 out of his 47 combined pro fights have actually seen the scorecards. And he's not the fastest man anymore. He's very hittable. You watch the Cub Swanson fight a few fights back, going back a couple of years now. But even at that point, I mean, at 35 years old, whatever he was, Pineda looked very hittable, got knocked down multiple times over the 2-round fight before getting knocked out cold by Cub Swanson. So I got to take Tucker Lutz. Very strong guy, physically capable, fast hands, got to be improving with all of this time off, healing up. And he's only 28 years old still. So he should be able to get the takedowns. He should be able to probably knock out Pineda on the feet at some point. So whether it's on the feet or whether it's a ground and pound TKO, give me Tucker Lutz to get this job done. Probably playing him inside the distance wouldn't be the worst option. If I can look and see what that actually is. I've got the props in front of me, at least on BetOnline. Tucker Lutz by KO, plus 190. Tucker Lutz just inside the distance is plus 115. That actually is not a bad play. I might actually take that myself. I mean, we are looking at a spot where Tucker Lutz is coming off of a long layoff, but I think this is a great matchup for him to come back to. So Tucker Lutz, let's call it like an early round 2 TKO stoppage. Middleweight bout up next between Chidi Njokuani and Albert Duraev. A classic striker versus grappler matchup here. The bigger man, Njokuani, is 34 years old at 6'3" and a long 80-inch reach. He was formerly a kickboxer at light heavyweight, and he's had some mixed martial arts fights down at welterweight and lower weight catch weights as well, but now he's at middleweight, very big for the weight class still. Albert Duraev, the same age, 5'11", so not the smallest guy around, giving up half a foot of reach here. And Albert Duraev, he came into the UFC with some pretty good credentials, high-level resume over the ACB promotion in Russia where he was the middleweight champion. 9 submissions out of his 15 wins. He has been knocked out in 4 of his losses, though all 4 of them have been finished by knockout, including his last fight against Joaquin Buckley. It was a TKO doctor stoppage, but in his last fight against Buckley, he struggled getting takedowns, his cardio faded, and his eye swelled up shut. In his debut against Roman Kopylov, struggled to get takedowns at the end of the fight. His cardio waned and his eyes swelled shut. So even though he just narrowly won that fight against Kopylov, wasn't the best of performances compared to that fight on the Contender Series where he scored a round 1 submission victory. But you got to remember, that was against a Brazilian fighter on the Contender Series who had never seen a Russian grappler before. So that tends to happen on the Contender Series. Albert Duraev, I'm just not impressed with the improvements he's been making. Fight to fight, he looks like he's getting a little bit worse or staying the same. Not always the most eager to wrestle right away either. I'd feel more comfortable if he wrestled from pillar to post, not after he starts getting boxed up and his face starts swelling. Chidi Njokuani, we've seen him struggle in the grappling in his Bellator career in the past, as a Muay Thai former kickboxer would. That's the part of his game he had to shore up, and he certainly has. You know, he lost in Bellator to guys like Andrei Kordashov, guys like John Salter, Rafael Carvalho. Those guys all utilized, either cage wrestling to get the takedown or takedowns in space to ground and pound or submit Chidi. But in the UFC, he's looked okay. You know, he fired that knee about 1 minute into round 1 against Gregory Rodriguez. Stopped that takedown by cutting RoboCop's eyebrow down to the bone. So he did end up getting ground and pounded and knocked down on a couple of occasions, suffering defeat in round 2 to RoboCop Rodriguez. But before that, he knocked out Marc-Andre Barrios very early. He knocked out, after brawling Dushko Todorovic, stuffing his takedowns, even threatening front chokes. So you can see the budding, improving game of Njokuani, whose cardio checks out more often than not. So give me Chidi Njokuani to keep this on the feet for the majority of round 1. Start damaging the face of Albert Duraev, breaking apart his will to continue. And even if Duraev does get the takedown, hopefully it's at the end of the round, they can restart on the feet in round 2, and I think Njokuani finishes the job by strikes there. So round 2, TKO for Njokuani is my pick here. I do have a moneyline bet on him at minus 160. I think that price tag is still about minus 160 to minus 170 for Njokuani, plus 140 for Duraev. Not the worst of underdogs in this card. We do have just the clear advantage, right? A wrestler versus a Muay Thai kickboxer, but I'm seeing more improving for Njokuani, so give me a round 2 knockout for Chidi. Fun flyweight bout up next between some pretty high-level guys at the weight class. Alex Perez taking on Manel Kape, and I'm a big fan of Manel Kape. I was a big fan of him in Risen. He's got a good, well-rounded skill set, beat high-level guys overseas on the Asian scene, and he's got explosive striking, finishing power in rounds 1. He does have a decent gas tank as well. That power does maintain as the fight goes, and he's got some slick jiu-jitsu as well, a good get-up ability, and he's just super fast. Usually has the speed advantage, even though he is 5'5", not the biggest flyweight around, but he gets in and out of range very, very well. Only 29 years old still for the long career he's had, with 11 knockouts and 5 submissions out of his 18 wins. So he is a finisher. But decision record so far is 2-4. But he's never been knocked out either. So he's got some pretty good durability and just a hard target to find. Alex Perez, 30 years old, so only 1 year older than Starboy. And Perez, we've only seen him fight, I think, twice in the past couple of years, compared to, I think, in that same amount of time, Manel Kape has fought 5 times, all 5 of his UFC bouts where he's gone 3-2. So you've got Perez on a 2-fight losing streak, Manel Kape on a 3-fight winning streak. There is a disparity in the momentum here. And Alex Perez, the reason he hasn't fought is because he cannot make weight to this weight class very well. He's either not making it to the scales to even miss weight, and he's hospitalized. I can't tell you how many times I had to break down Matt Schnell versus Alex Perez, like 5 times, and the fight never took place. Alex Perez, I just can't trust where he's at in his career right now. Like, if you can't make weight and you continuously try to fight at this weight class instead of moving up where he would be undersized, I'm just not sure how his durability is going to fare if he's miraculously making 125 and then a shell of himself against Manel Kape, who's going to already have a speed advantage over him. The best case scenario for Alex Perez is he's fixed whatever nutrition or weight cutting strategy he needs. He comes in here a full version of himself. Then we've got trouble because we've got a pretty good wrestling threat from Alex Perez. And Manel Kape can be caught playing jiu-jitsu off of his back. He can suffer from that lack of takedown defense and be a little bit too comfortable not getting up. But as we saw in his last fights against David Dvorak, Manel Kape does have that jiu-jitsu I talked about. He did threaten and almost got Kimura after being on bottom position to Dvorak. Dvorak was saved by the bell, otherwise his arm would have been broken. So that does make me feel a little bit better. I do have a 3-unit moneyline bet on Manel Kape at minus 170. I think the moneyline is still right around that. We're looking at minus 170, minus 180 for Manel Kape. Alex Perez, the plus 150 underdog. And again, this is largely out of the cage stuff, is why I'm not buying in on Alex Perez's skill set here. It's also just been so long. His momentum is completely crushed. And I think even if he wants to get his wrestling going, it doesn't always last into the later parts of the fight as far as his danger goes to finish the fight or win minutes. And I think Manel Kape is going to be a very hard target to find. His sprawl and brawl game is pretty good, and he could find himself in a dominant position as well if he transitions correctly. So the striking, the power, the speed, just the activity and the momentum he's been on so far, it seems like Manel Kape has really found his footing at the UFC level. So I like what I'm seeing from him. The win over Dvorak in his last fight convincingly, the round 1 knockout over Zalgas, the round 1 flying knee knockout over Ode Osborne. The guy's doing pretty well. So give me Manel Kape pretty confidently on the money line here. You could look for Kape inside the distance, but I think all of those props are pretty steamed. So just give me the money line at minus 170. I'm cool with that. Women's flyweight bout up next between Andrea KGB Lee and Macy, I think it's Macy the Future Barber. I think that's also Ian Gary's nickname too. So what a future that is with those two. But either way, I mean, it does make sense. Macy Barber entered the UFC, I think at like age 20 or 21. She's now 24 years old and still 10 years younger than Andrea Lee, who's 34. So they both have the same amount of fights in the UFC, 9 apiece, 5-4 in the UFC for Andrea Lee, 7-2 in the UFC for Macy Barber. Not a bad record, and I would say that the better wins have come from Macy Barber. She's the more dangerous fighter, as she bursts into the scene in the UFC with like 3 stoppage victories. Her ground and pound is pretty nasty. Andrea Lee, probably the better losses. She's faced some pretty good competition like Lauren Murphy, people like that at least hang in the top-ranked part of the division. But, ultimately, both girls are battle-tested so far. We kind of see where their weaknesses are. And Macy Barber, still young enough to improve at least. Now she's at Team Alpha Male and working on the wrestling, the clinch control, the cage wrestling, the ability to maybe get this fight to the mat where she can then utilize more effectively and consistently that ground and pound. Because at range, her striking is not as good as Andrea Lee's. Andrea Lee, kickboxer, Muay Thai background, even a traditional boxing background. So her combinations are better, her punches are more technical. And if Macy Barber were to be stuck striking at distance against Andrea Lee for the majority of 3 rounds, she will lose the fight. And the money line will look silly because she's a minus 260 favorite over the plus 220 Andrea Lee. So I can see why this is. Andrea Lee is coming off of a pretty decisive loss to Viviane Araújo, where she was taken down repeatedly and beat up. Macy Barber coming off of a couple of wins back-to-back, last being it was a pretty decisive victory last summer over Jessica Ai. Landed more strikes in all rounds, although she was taken down in round 2 and probably lost that round. But overall, she has got a karate background in her youth, but at distance, her striking is just very sloppy, and it's just a work in progress. I would expect at 24 that she's making improvements each time we see her. But yeah, the wrestling is going to be the key to victory here. So I'm going to take Macy Barber. I think the money line is wide. I think it's going to look wide, and it's going to play out closer than the odds indicate. But just the physicality, toughness, and aggression of Macy Barber, able to maybe absorb those strikes of Andrea Lee, eat a couple of them, eat some jabs, but keep moving forward and back Andrea Lee up to the cage. Stalemate her there, wear her out there, and then eventually rip the fight to the mat and get some ground and pound going. So I'm going to take Macy Barber to employ a well-rounded game here in this bout on Saturday and get her hand raised. But yeah, I don't know how to play this besides, because Macy Barber could finish this inside the distance. She has that capability, especially if she's still improving. But, her winning by decision is probably the most likely path. So give me Macy Barber by decision. An exciting featherweight bout up next between Nate Landwehr and Austin Lingo. 2 guys that were not supposed to face each other at this fight night. We had Nate Landwehr against Bruce Leroy Caceres. That fight got called off. I think Caceres had some sort of injury and withdrew. And Austin Lingo was supposed to fight a couple weeks back against Ricardo Ramos, who missed weight pretty drastically. So now they face each other. And looking at where the money lines were against their previous opponents is interesting, right? Because Nate Landwehr, although he's a minus 225 favorite now over Lingo, he was a slight underdog, I think like plus 150 to Caceres, which makes sense. You had the more well-rounded fighter with more experience in Caceres, a good kicking game from the outside, and a good BJJ game on the mat, whereas Austin Lingo is primarily one-dimensional, a good traditional boxer, a good forward pressure style and good combinations and output, and he's pretty durable, only one loss by decision out of his 10 fights. He was scheduled to face Ricardo Ramos, who was like a minus 350 or more favorite against him. Again, Ramos, pretty good experience, explosive movements and power, good technique from the outside, but a very good takedown and BJJ game. So that has been the bane of the existence of Austin Lingo in the past. Lingo coming off of like a year-and-a-half long layoff. The last fight he had was against Luis Saldana, who was able to outstrike Lingo and put him in trouble in round 1, but gassed out as the fight went on into round 2 and round 3, where Lingo took over and actually knocked down Saldana to win a decision. Now, this is the complete opposite fight. You're not going to have a guy that is powerful in round 1 and then fades. You're going to have Nate Landwehr, who could, let you have a few strikes on his face in round 1, and then he's going to come back in round 2 and round 3 with a vengeance and outpace pretty much everybody, which is what he did in his last fight in August against David Onama. Nate Landwehr got hurt pretty badly in round 1, recovered, and then I live bet him at plus 300 going into round 2, and he, outpaced and just out-cardioed the hell out of David Onama, had him in all sorts of submission trouble, ground and pound trouble, and, eventually had a very exciting round 3, but still won by decision. So 16-4 record for Nate Landwehr, 8 knockouts, 7-1 in decision results. He has one submission, but he does attack front chokes quite a bit. Jumps guillotine when he sees the opportunity, grabs onto a rear naked choke, and he got that anaconda over Ludovic Klein in round 3 in the UFC. So pretty much you have to defeat Nate Landwehr in round 1 the way that Julian Erosa got a flying knee on him in round 1. Herbert Burns need him in round 1. So far he's faced a defeat that way, but he did have one submission loss early in his career before his M1 championship run over in Russia. So, this guy has been fighting Russians. He's used to the grappling. He's used to fast starters like David Onama. Lingo is not the most powerful guy with the boxing. He's got high pace and pretty good output and technique, but Nate Landwehr is going to best him in the clinch with the dirty boxing, the more of the MMA techniques, the takedown threat, and just the pace and the cardio. Just a furious 5-round pace that he's accustomed to building into a fight. So give me Nate Landwehr here, minus 225. Might be a lot for a guy who could be a punching bag in round 1. He could get soundly outstruck by the better boxer in Lingo in round 1, but you could live bet this guy in between rounds as well. Maybe put half of your units that you want to bet on Nate Landwehr in round 1. Do that pre-flop, and then also do half of it, after round 1, where I'm sure he will build as a better fighter going forward. So I'm actually going to take Nate Landwehr by a round 3 submission. I think he's going to tire out Austin Lingo, get him to the mat where he suffered before, and end up grabbing up a neck. So give me Nate Landwehr, round 3 sub. Women's bantamweight bout up next between Holly Holm and Yana Kunitskaya, who is now Yana Santos. We've got Holly Holm as a massive, well, not a massive, but I think for 41 years old, it's a pretty sizable favorite here. Minus 250 and climbing, plus 200, the underdog price tag on Yana Santos. Holly Holm is 41 years old, as I mentioned, the former boxing world champion, the former UFC bantamweight champion, famously defeating Ronda Rousey and ending her career with that head kick. But she also had 3 unsuccessful title fights after that. There were 2 of them at featherweight against the kickboxer Jermaine Durandamy and against Chris Cyborg. And then she also did challenge for the bantamweight belt again against Amanda Nunes and got finished. So, now she's been largely just being the gatekeeper, maintaining her spot. She is still very talented at 41 years old, and her strengths are obviously the striking weapons, good kicking game at range, good boxing still with the hands. Although I will say in her older age, she is a little bit lower volume. She has adapted more to a grappling and cage stalling type of game plan. And against some of the girls that don't have great takedown defense, she's even managed to get some throws in there as well. 14-6 record for Holly Holm. She still has no submissions, but eight knockouts on her career, 6-4 in decisions. And she's rarely been finished, just once by submission and once by knockout, of course. We mentioned the Amanda Nunes fight. Now, Yana Santos, 33 years old, so still a bit younger, still has some wins left in her career here for the Muay Thai fighter with a Taekwondo background. She does have good clinch work. She does have that skill set from her Muay Thai background, good elbows and knees up close. But she can struggle in the cage grappling side of things. She can get taken down by better wrestlers. And she can get outstruck at range by, better strikers. So I think that's going to be pretty much a recipe for success for Holly Holm here, because you don't have the Ketlin Vieira type of power coming back your way, that plotting, feet-planted style that gave Holly Holm trouble and is why she lost that split decision over 5 rounds for Holly Holm last time she fought. Ketlin Vieira was able to get some bigger moments, some explosive moments, even threaten with like a rear naked choke from a standing position. Yana Kunitskaya, I don't think is going to have that skill set. She's not going to have the threat of like the fight-ending potential here. So, in fact, the opposite is true. Yana Santos, 3 of her losses are by knockout. I think most of them in the UFC. It was Aspen Ladd grounded her, pounded her out. I know Chris Cyborg did as well. That's forgivable. And Irina Aldana most recently dropped her with a big left hook, finished her up with ground strikes. So not the most durable, not super high output striker either. Now, you could expect at 41 years old a regression in, I see her cardio fading a little bit, even though she does have great 5-round cardio. Holly Holm's cardio doesn't seem to be what it used to be at her peak. The striking output numbers, not what they used to be. So, there's some things that could regress here, which is why I'm hesitant to take her at minus 250. Good stylistic matchup for her, though. I think she does get her hand raised. You could look at, I think, minus 150, minus 155 for Holly Holm by decision. Seems to be the most likely path. Overall, a pass betting-wise for me, but I'm going to take Holly Holm to get the job done. Just the better advantages in this fight. Okay, we've made it to the main event at bantamweight. Potential 5-round bout between Marlon Chito Vera and Corey Sandhagen. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's break into this main event at bantamweight. An awesome fight between two very talented 135ers. Marlon Chito Vera finds himself as an underdog here at plus 150. Corey Sandhagen, the moderate favorite at minus 175. And Marlon Vera, he's getting hard to deny at this point. On a 4-fight winning streak, coming off of a round 4 knockout, head kick knockout cold over Dominic Cruz at UFC San Diego last August. And he was sort of losing that fight. That is sort of a theme in Marlon Chito Vera's fights. He tends to drop round 1 and, then start going from there. After data collecting a bit, finding the timing and the tendencies of his opponents, he can get outstruck the way he was in the previous fight against Rob Font. Outstruck largely, but managed to get knockdowns in rounds 2, 3, and 4 and win that bout decisively. When you see the faces of both men, it wasn't even close. Rob Font looked like he had been attacked by an axe murderer. And before that, Frankie Edgar at the end of 2021 was knocked out by that front kick in round 3 of Marlon Vera. And what kicked off this 4-fight winning streak was the fight against Davey Grant. Again, dropped round 1 to Davey Grant, a pretty savvy veteran, but then Marlon Vera made up for it in rounds 2 and rounds 3. So, as opposed to a 3-round fight, that's 33% of the fight is round 1. Marlon Vera can, afford to do that a bit more in this fight. Only 20% out of a 5-round fight is round 1. So, not the best strategy to enter the fight and not gain your opponent's respect instantly, but if that's the way he goes about timing his opponents and landing the big strikes later in the fight, that could be a viable strategy. And you're going to need all the time in the world to time and data collect against Corey Sandhagen, because this guy moves like sort of in his prime, but more evolved version of Dominic Cruz. He does have that sort of figure 8 style of his footwork, forward, backward, side-to-side style. But Corey Sandhagen switches stances constantly, feints before and after he switches stances, always giving you looks. You never know quite what he's setting up, or if he's just playing with you and just buying time to land his strikes. Good 1-2s. Not the most powerful strikes, but he does throw dynamic strikes like spinning wheel kicks, flying knees, of course, he'll attempt pretty often. Out of both stances, too, he's always trying to get you to circle and follow him, and then he'll hit you with a pull counter. So, yeah, I think the power advantage goes to Marlon Vera. I think if somebody finishes this fight, it is Marlon Vera, but Sandhagen can't be slept on. He's had his finishing moments as well, but neither guy has ever been knocked out before, so it makes this interesting, and Marlon Vera has never been submitted either. So, If either guy is to wrestle here, I would say Marlon Vera has a pretty good chance of, getting the cage stalling, using his physicality there. Corey Sandhagen has played that trick even in his last fight against Song Yadong and gone for takedowns himself, but he can be reversed at times. His takedown defense is not always the best. He finds himself on bottom position. Marlon Vera, BJJ black belt. Sandhagen, I'm not sure what his rank is, but both guys, I'd say, are probably going to strike it out. It's going to be a battle of volume versus moments, right? The moments from Marlon Chito Vera versus, and it seems like whenever he touches his opponents, they seem to get wobbled and not like it. So it doesn't take very much. Jabs, just like lead left hooks. I mean, even like strikes like those that don't have a lot of wind up. Marlon Vera is dropping guys with that. So Corey Sandhagen needs to be careful. In his last fight in September, Song Yadong did put hands on him and put him in harm's way, wobble him a few times in that fight. Before that, Sandhagen did have that loss in the title challenge against Peter Yan, and I think that marked the only time he'd been knocked down in a fight later on in the championship round. So both guys are 30 years old, still room to make some improvements, and I think if anybody makes improvements, it would be Marlon Chito Vera, like an easy improvement to bantamweight with just not dropping round one, being a little bit higher volume, letting your hands and strikes go a bit more. I mean, that's not unfathomable to make that kind of a change at 135 versus a heavier weight class, So I could see some improvements from Vera in this spot. I think Corey Sandhagen's style is good enough as it is to beat most power punchers, but I'm going to slightly edge towards the underdog in this spot. I think Marlon Vera can win those moments, and I think he can come away with either a late stoppage in rounds 4 or 5 or get the decision and get the judges' approval here. But from a betting perspective, I'm not strong enough on that side to bet the money line. But what I do like is on BetOnline, they have the point, and I think on 5 Dimes as well, they have the point handicap, which means Marlon Chito Vera is the underdog. This is a 5-round fight. If you bet him the point handicap at plus 5.5 points, all that really means is that you just need to have him win one judge's scorecard across the board. So like say it's a 49-46 victory for Corey Sandhagen. Marlon Chito Vera loses, but our bet on that point handicap would win. If Marlon Vera gets a knockout in this fight, that point handicap would still win since he's the underdog. So that's minus 210 for him to just win one round on the scorecards, get credit for a big moment at some point in this fight, early or late. I like that spot a lot. I did put 3 units on that at minus 210. So that's the spot I like. I also do like the overs, the over 3.5, over 4.5, and the fight goes to decision. I think that's not a bad spot here just because both guys are so durable. Sandhagen going to be a hard target to find, and I really don't think Marlon Vera is going to take his first knockout loss or submission loss at the hands of Sandhagen. So I'm going to lean with the more dangerous guy, Marlon Vera. I'm not really going to doubt his win streak much longer. And at an underdog price, I think that's not a bad bet. So I like the points handicap, but give me Marlon Vera to win by decision. Okay, there you have it, you guys. All the fights broken down for UFC San Antonio this Saturday, featuring that epic bantamweight bout between Marlon Chito Vera and Corey Sandhagen. That weight class never fails to deliver exciting main events. I can't wait for it. And there are some good, exciting, violent spots on the rest of the card as well. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. Make sure you guys tune in for my live stream on Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central Time with Tim Troiano, one half of the Lambo Plays podcast himself. Should be a blast, and we'll find some extra ways to make some money betting on the UFC this Saturday. See you guys then. Cheers.